The lights in Las Vegas were blinding, the energy electric, and the anticipation absolutely off the charts. It was May 3rd, 2025, a date fight fans around the world had circled for months. The arena was packed, shoulder to shoulder, with fans, celebrities, trainers, and legends alike. This was more than a championship defense. This was legacy versus legacy in the making. On one side, the reigning super middleweight king, Canelo Alvarez. On the other, the undefeated and unrelenting knockout machine, William the Executioner, Skull. This was power versus precision, experience versus youth, champion versus challenger. As the fighters made their way to the ring, the air was thick with tension. Skull, eyes locked forward, breathing slowly, moved with the icy calm of a man who had ended every fight before the final bell. 24 wins, 22 knockouts. A rising force. But across from him was a man who had seen everything. Canelo Alvarez, now 34, had danced under brighter lights than most ever dream of. His resume was stacked with champions, his skill set, polished by decades of war. He carried belts, yes, but he also carried the weight of a generation's expectations. The bell rang. Round 1 began. The early moments of the fight were a study in restraint and strategy. Both men respected the danger the other posed. Skull, usually aggressive, was measured, perhaps too much so. Canelo took the center of the bow, ring almost immediately, probing with his jab, feinting, testing reactions. He knew Skull had power in both hands. He wasn't about to walk into something foolish. Skull circled, firing the occasional right to the body, but Canelo blocked most of the early attempts. It was a classic opening, tight, cautious, calculating. By round 2, the tension escalated. Skull began to open up, launching a right hand that caught Canelo's gloves, and then trying a sneaky uppercut on the inside. Canelo responded with a hook to the body that drew an audible gasp from the crowd. It was a reminder. The Mexican legend still had dynamite in his fists. Still had that surgical ability to make opponents uncomfortable, to force them to fight at his pace. Round 3 was tighter. Skull began landing with more regularity, short jabs, quick check hooks as Canelo came forward. But with every moment of success, Canelo returned fire with something harder. A crisp uppercut here, a rib rattling left to the liver there. You could see Skull beginning to realize this was a different kind of fight. This wasn't a shootout. It was survival in a tactical war. In round 4, the dynamic changed dramatically. Just a minute into the round, Skull launched a booming overhand right that clipped Canelo on the temple. The crowd jumped. It was the cleanest shot of the fight so far. Canelo stepped back, reset, but his face said it all. He felt it. Skull sensed opportunity and pounced, firing a short combination that forced Canelo to clinch. The crowd roared. Maybe, just maybe, the challenger was turning the tide. But then came round 5, and with it, a masterclass in momentum control. Canelo dug deep into his vault. He slowed the tempo, used his jab to frustrate Skull, and began landing vicious hooks to the body. Every shot echoed through the arena. Skull winced, gritted his teeth, but kept firing. Yet by the end of the round, you could see the toll it was taking. His hands were starting to drop, his movement was a little less crisp. And Canelo? Calm as ever. Eyes focused. Breathing under control. The legend was in his element. Round 6 was all Canelo. From the opening bell, he pressed forward with purpose. A left hook to the ribs. A jab upstairs. Then a 3-punch combo that forced Skull to retreat for the first time in the fight. You could see it now. Canelo was walking him down, systematically breaking him apart. Every time Skull tried to fire back, Canelo slipped just out of range, answered with something sharper, harder, smarter. The Executioner was starting to look human. Round 7 was perhaps the most pivotal of the entire night. Skull, showing. Incredible heart came out swinging. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was just instinct. He connected with a flush right hand early in the round, momentarily stunning Canelo. But the champion didn't backpedal. Instead, he waved Skull forward. And what followed was a brutal inside exchange. hooks, uppercuts, elbows brushing shoulders. It was dirty, gritty, raw. But Canelo got the better of it. He spun off the ropes and landed a short left that nearly dropped Skull. By round 8, the signs of damage were visible. Skull's right eye was swelling, his legs a half step behind his mind. Still, he fought on. Still, he swung with menace. And yet, Canelo's dominance was unmistakable. He began to toy with angles, stepping in and out of range, landing body-head combinations that showed why he's considered one of the smartest fighters of his generation. Round 9 was all about survival for Skull. Canelo was hunting. He landed a series of body shots that folded Skull momentarily. The referee looked close to stepping in, but Skull raised his gloves and kept firing. You had to respect it. He was down but not out, hurt but not broken. Then came round 10, the defining round of the fight. It started quiet, almost deceptively so. Both men exchanged light jabs. Then Canelo feinted left, rolled under a wide hook from Skull, and boom. A counter left hook exploded on Skull's chin. The crowd leapt to its feet as Skull's legs buckled and he dropped to the canvas, flat on his back. The referee began counting. 4, 5. Skull rolled over. 6, 7. He was on his knees. 8, 9. He stood up, just barely. The ref looked in his eyes, gave him the nod. The fight continued. But from that point on, it was academic. Canelo didn't rush. He didn't need to. He boxed smart. Let Skull come to him. Picked him apart piece by piece. You could see the difference between elite and great, between challenger and champion. Round 11 was a controlled dismantling. Canelo didn't take risks. He slipped, pivoted, and punished. Every shot was calculated. Every step had purpose. Skull was trying, credit to him, but it was no longer close. The fire he came in with was now smoke. And then round 12. The final round was a victory lap for the champion. Canelo boxed, from the outside, showboating a little, smiling between combinations. Skull, bloody but unbowed, kept coming forward. He wasn't going to quit. Not tonight. Not ever. The bell rang and both men raised their arms. But only one had truly earned the right. As the scorecards were read, there was no suspense. 118, 109, 117, 110, 119, 108. A unanimous decision. Still the undisputed super middleweight champion of the world, Canelo Alvarez. The crowd erupted, not in surprise, but in respect. For a man who continues to defy age, expectations, and the brutality of the sport itself. Canelo embraced his corner, lifted his belts, and took a long look at the crowd. You could see it in his eyes. He still had more to give. Skull stood across the ring, bruised but proud. He had stepped into the fire and survived. No excuses, no shame. He came to fight, and fight he did. As the post-fight interview began, Canelo, ever composed, thanked his team, his fans, and even his opponent. He spoke of the preparation, of the challenge Skull posed, of what comes next. Retirement? Not yet, he said with a grin. Not while he still feels this sharp, not while there are still names to cross off the list. And so ends another chapter in the storied career of Saul Canelo Alvarez, a legend who continues to build his case as one of the greatest to ever step through the ropes. For William Skull, the night was a lesson, a painful, humbling lesson, but also one that could shape his future. He took the best in the world the full 12 rounds. He got up when many wouldn't, and in this brutal business that matters. The arena emptied slowly, fans buzzing, phones lighting up with reactions, but one truth was clear to everyone who watched. On May 3, 2025, we saw greatness in motion. Canelo Alvarez once again proved that he's not just a champion, he's an era.
The shower, where the sound of the water hid my pain. I didn't miss Henry exactly. I missed the life I thought we'd have, the one I dreamed of when I said I do. I still wore my wedding ring, a thin gold band that felt heavy on my finger. I'd look at it when I felt confused, turning it around and around, asking myself, did I fail or did he give up? I didn't have an answer yet. All I knew was that something inside me was broken, like a glass that had shattered and couldn't be put back together. One morning, Madison handed me a cup of coffee, her eyes kind but firm. She said, "You don't have to stay stuck in that past, Haley. You didn't break this marriage alone." Her words sank into me, like water soaking into dry soil. They stayed with me, repeating in my mind as I went back to work at the school. I answered phones, filed papers, and smiled at the students, but everything felt different. I wasn't the same Haley anymore. I felt like I was wearing a mask, pretending to be okay while my heart was still mending. After work, I'd come home, to Madison's quiet apartment. She often worked late, so I'd make simple dinners, soup from a can or a sandwich with whatever was in the fridge. I started reading again, something I hadn't done in years. Henry used to say reading was boring, a waste of time. Now, I could sit with a book for hours, losing myself in stories about faraway places and brave people. Some nights, I'd stand by the window, watching the stars through the glass, listening to cars pass by on the street below. I'd wonder where those people were going, if they were happy, if they had someone waiting for them. I'd ask myself, will I ever be happy again? One evening, I was cleaning out my closet when I found an old shoebox tucked in the back. Inside were letters I'd written to myself when I was a teenager, full of dreams and hopes. I wanted to travel to places like Paris or New York, to write stories that made people feel something, to open a small bookstore with a coffee counter and flowers by the door. I'd forgotten those dreams when I married Henry. I'd stopped thinking about what I wanted, pouring all my energy into being a good wife, into making him happy, but it was never enough. Sitting on the floor, surrounded by those letters, I cried again. But these tears were different. They weren't for Henry. They were for the girl I used to be, the one who believed in a bigger, brighter life. I stayed up late that night, reading every letter, my heart aching for the dreams I'd let go. The next day, I took off my wedding ring. I held it in my hand, feeling its weight, then placed it in the shoebox with the letters and closed the lid. I didn't throw it away, but I didn't wear it anymore. It was time to start over, to find that girl again. A few weeks later, I was at the supermarket picking up milk and apples after work. I turned a corner, and there was Henry, standing by the bread aisle. He looked the same, maybe a little tired, his hair a bit longer. He saw me and froze, his hand pausing on a loaf of rye. "Haley," he said, his voice low. "Hi," I said. My voice quiet but my heart loud, pounding in my chest. He walked over slowly, his boots scuffing the floor, and said, "You look good." I nodded and said, "Thanks. How are you?" He shrugged, hands in his pockets, and said, "Same." "You living with Madison?" I said yes. He asked, "Still at the school?" I nodded again. He looked down at the floor, then up at me, and said, "I didn't think you'd leave so fast." I didn't say anything. He shifted his weight and said, "I've been thinking. Maybe we gave up too early." I looked at him, really looked at him, those same hazel eyes, that same voice I used to love, but my heart didn't flutter like it once did. I said, "I didn't give up, Henry. I stayed until there was nothing left to hold on to." He opened his mouth, then closed it. I said, "I tried. You didn't want to try." He nodded slowly and said, "Yeah, I know." We stood there, the hum of the supermarket around us, people pushing carts, a baby crying somewhere. I felt strange, not angry, not sad, just done. He said, "Well, good seeing you." I said, "You too," and turned away, walking to the checkout. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt something new. Peace. Henry didn't have power over me anymore. I wasn't his sunshine, and I didn't need to be. A few weeks later, Madison sat me down at her kitchen table. She said she was moving in with her boyfriend, and I could stay in her apartment if I wanted, but I knew I didn't want that. I needed a place that was mine, a space where I could rebuild myself. I started looking for apartments, checking listings, online, and driving around town after work. I found a small studio near the school, just one room with a tiny bathroom and a kitchen barely big enough for a stove. The walls were plain white, the floors worn wood, but it felt like a blank canvas. I signed the lease, my hands shaking with excitement and fear. I bought a secondhand sofa, a cheap rug with blue flowers, and 2 small plants at a farmer's market. I named them Lucy and Fern, laughing at myself for giving plants names, but it made me smile every time I watered them. The first night in my new place, I sat on the sofa, a cup of tea in my hands, and felt scared. What if I made another mistake? What if I was always alone? But then I thought of the girl in those letters, the one who dreamed big. She wasn't afraid of starting over, and neither was I. I painted the walls a soft blue, the color of a clear sky, and bought pillows that felt like a hug. I started writing again, just small stories at first. A girl who finds a lost dog, a woman who discovers a message in a bottle on the beach. They weren't perfect, but they made me happy, like I was letting pieces of my heart spill onto the page. At work, I felt lighter, like I wasn't carrying so much weight. I laughed at the students' silly jokes, said yes when coworkers invited me to lunch, and said no when I needed time to myself. I didn't talk about Henry unless someone asked, and most people didn't. One day, a coworker named Emily stopped by my desk. She was older, with kind eyes and a soft voice. She said, "I heard you went through something hard." I nodded, not sure what to say. She handed me a chocolate chip cookie wrapped in a napkin and said, "You're doing better than you think, Haley." I smiled, my throat tight, and said, "Thank you." That small gesture meant more than she could know. One afternoon, I was at the library returning a book when I saw a flyer taped to a bulletin board. It was for a writing class at the community center, held every Tuesday night. I stood there, staring at the bright yellow paper, my hands warm, my heart beat fast. I'd never taken a class like that, but something about it felt right. I took the flyer home, taped it to my fridge, and signed up the next day. The class had 7 people, some older, some young, all nervous like me. The teacher, Mr. Dean, was a man in his 60s with round glasses and a love for books that shone in his voice. He smiled at me on the first night and said, "Everyone, here has a story, Haley. Don't be afraid to share yours." That night, I wrote about my wedding day. The rain on the courthouse steps, the blue dress that felt too big, the pizza we ate afterward because we couldn't afford a fancy dinner. I read it aloud, my voice shaking, my hands gripping the paper. When I finished, the room was quiet. A woman with gray hair said, "That was beautiful." A younger man nodded and said, "It felt so real." I felt tears prick my eyes, but I didn't cry. I just said thank you and sat down, my heart full. I went to the writing class every week, bringing new stories each time. I wrote about my past, moments of pain, like the night Henry ignored my candlelit dinner or the day I found that woman in our apartment. But I also wrote about hope, stories of soft mornings, strong women who didn't give up, second chances. That felt like sunlight after a storm. Writing felt like coming home, like finding a piece of myself I'd lost. One evening, after class, I stayed to help stack chairs. Mr. Dean looked at me, his eyes kind behind his glasses, and said, "You have a gift, Haley." I blushed and said, "I just write what I feel." He nodded and said, "That's the best way to do it." I walked home that night, the air cold but my heart warm, a new story tucked in my bag. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. 3 months into the class, Mr. Dean handed out notes after a session. Mine was written in his neat handwriting. "Your story made someone cry in a good way. Keep writing." I read it over and over, smiling all the way home. The next day, I sat at my small kitchen table and wrote for 2 hours straight, not checking the time, not looking at my phone. When I finished, I looked around my studio. Sunlight streamed through the window, catching the green leaves of Lucy and Fern. My heart felt quiet, not heavy or loud, just still. I whispered to myself, "You're okay, Haley." It was the first time I believed it. I decided to start a blog, a simple one where I could share my stories. At first, only Madison read it, leaving comments like, "This is amazing," and "You're so talented." Then, strangers found it, people I'd Never met, leaving messages that said, "This feels like my life," or "Thank you for writing this." I didn't know their faces, but their words felt like warm hands on my back, lifting me up. I started to believe my voice mattered, that my stories could touch someone, even just one person, and that was enough. One Saturday morning, I went to a bookstore downtown, a place with creaky floors and shelves that reached the ceiling. I loved walking through the aisles, touching the covers of books, breathing in the smell of paper and ink. In the corner, I saw a small group sitting in a circle reading poetry aloud. A woman with short black hair looked up and smiled. "Want to join?" she asked. I hesitated, then sat down, my hands folded in my lap. I didn't read anything that day, but I listened to their words, soft, full of feeling, like music. Felt at home, like I belonged there. The next week, I went back with a short story I'd written in class, one about a woman who finds a letter in a park and learns to forgive herself. My hands shook as I read, but I got through it. When I finished, a man across from me said, "That sounded like truth." His name was Daniel. He was about my age, with kind eyes and a gray sweater that looked soft. After the group ended, he waited by the door and said, "You have a strong voice, Haley." I smiled and said, "Thank you." He said, "I like your writing." I said, "I liked yours too," even though he hadn't read anything that day. He grinned and said, "Maybe next time." We started talking after each poetry session, just small things at first, books we loved, music we listened to, the best coffee shops in town. Daniel was easy to talk to. He listened without interrupting, his eyes steady, his words never rushed. After 3 weeks, he asked, "Would you like to get coffee sometime?" My heart felt nervous, but not scared, not like it used to. I said, "Yes, I'd like that." We met at a small cafe by the river, a place with big windows and chairs that sank when you sat down. We talked for 2 hours, the coffee growing cold in our cups. I told him about my blog, how writing was helping me find myself again. He said he was learning to write too, after a hard breakup that left him feeling lost. "Writing helps me heal," he said. I nodded and said, "Me too." We didn't talk about love or anything big, but I felt something start, like a tiny seed planted in soft soil. Over the next few weeks, we spent more time together. We walked along the river, the water sparkling in the sun. We sat in parks, watching kids play and dogs chase balls. We talked about our families, our pains, our hopes for the future. I didn't feel like I had to hide anything from Daniel. He didn't ask for more than I could give. One day, I told him about Henry. We were sitting on a bench sharing a bag of popcorn. I said, "I married young, Daniel. I thought I was doing the right thing." He looked at me, his face gentle, and said, "Thank you for telling me." He didn't push for details or judge me. That was enough. Daniel never rushed me, never made me feel like I had to be someone I wasn't. He left space for me to be myself, and I liked that. It made me feel safe, like I could breathe. One Sunday, we were walking through a neighborhood with small houses, each with its own little garden. One house had flowers in the windows and a wooden sign that said, "Story Time." Cafe. I stopped staring at it, my heart skipping a beat. I said, "That's the kind of place I used to dream about when I was a kid. A bookstore and coffee shop together, small, quiet, full of light." Daniel tilted his head and asked, "What kind of place?" I said, "I wanted to open one someday, with books and coffee and flowers by the door." He looked at the house, then at me, and said, "Maybe that dream isn't gone." I shook my head, laughing softly. "It's just a dream, Daniel." He smiled and said, "Dreams don't die, Haley. Sometimes they wait." Those words stuck. With me, like a song I couldn't stop humming. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, thinking about the girl who wrote those letters, the one who wanted more from life. Maybe she was still inside me, waiting for me to listen. I started saving money, just a few dollars at a time, tucking it away in a jar on my kitchen counter. I looked at small shops for rent, driving by empty storefronts after work, imagining what they could be. I talked to Madison over coffee, telling her about the bookstore idea. She leaned forward, her eyes bright, and said, "I believe in you, Haley. You can do this." Her words were like a spark, lighting something inside me. 6 months later, I found a tiny space near the school. It used to be a bakery, and the air still smelled faintly of cinnamon and warm bread. I signed the lease, my hands shaking so much I could barely hold the pen. Daniel came over with paint cans and brushes, helping me turn the plain walls into a soft, welcoming cream. Madison spent hours with me, picking out books from thrift stores and library sales. My mom visited one afternoon, her eyes soft with pride, and gave me an old brass lamp for the front table. "For light and hope," she said, hugging me tight. I named the place Haley's Pages, a simple name that felt like mine. We opened on a sunny Tuesday morning. I stood behind the counter, nervous but excited, as the first customer walked in, a little girl holding her father's hand. She picked out a picture book with a dog on the cover, her eyes wide with delight. I gave her a cookie from a tray I'd baked and said, "Come back any time." She grinned, and her dad thanked me. I didn't make much money that first month, but I didn't care. People came to read, to talk, to sit quietly with a cup of coffee. I wrote between customers, jotting down stories on a notebook I kept by the register. I smiled every day, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. For the first time in years, I felt proud of something I'd built with my own hands, my own heart. Daniel came by often, sometimes bringing daisies from the market, sometimes just a warm smile that made the room feel brighter. He started reading to kids on Saturday mornings, sitting cross-legged on a rug, his voice steady as he brought stories to life. He fixed a broken shelf one afternoon, hammering nails while I made him coffee. He never asked for anything in return, never made me feel like I owed him. One evening, as we locked the shop's door together, the sky pink with sunset, he looked at me and said, "You built this from nothing, Haley." I shook my head, smiling, and said, "No, I built it from pain." He reached for my hand, his touch gentle, and said, "And you turned it into beauty." I don't know what the future will bring. Maybe Daniel and I will fall in love, our friendship growing into something deeper, something lasting. Maybe we'll stay friends, sharing coffee and stories, supporting each other through life's ups and downs. I'm not scared anymore, not of love, not of being alone, not of failing. I'm not the girl who ran away from home to be a wife, hoping someone else would make her happy. I'm the woman who left a cold, empty home and built a warm one, piece by piece, with courage I didn't know I had. I'm Haley, and I'm okay. I'm more than okay. I'm alive. I'm growing, and I'm ready for whatever comes next.